Volcanoes. Harun Tazif, the Polish scientist, has spent his lifetime studying active volcanoes and deep caves in all parts of the world. In 1948, he went to Lake Kivu in the Congo to observe a new volcano which he later named Kituro. Tazif was able to set up his camp very close to the volcano while it was erupting violently. Though he managed to take a number of brilliant photographs, he could not stay near the volcano for very long. He noticed that a river of liquid rock was coming towards him. It threatened to surround him completely, but Tazif managed to escape just in time. He waited until the volcano became quiet, and he was able to return 2 days later. This time, he managed to climb into the mouth of Kituro so that he could take photographs and measure temperatures. Tazif has often risked his life in this way. He has been able to tell us more about active volcanoes than any man alive. Persistent. I crossed the street to avoid meeting him, but he saw me and came running towards me. It was no use pretending that I had not seen him, so I waved to him. I never enjoy meeting Nigel Dykes. He never has anything to do. No matter how busy you are, he always insists on coming with you. I had to think of a way of preventing him from following me around all morning. "Hello, Nigel," I said. "Fancy meeting you here." "Hi, Elizabeth," Nigel answered. "I was just wondering how to spend the morning. Until I saw you." "You're not busy doing anything, are you?" "No, not at all," I answered. "I'm going to—" "Would you mind my coming with you?" he asked, before I had finished speaking. "Not at all," I lied. "But I'm going to the dentist." "Then I'll come with you," he answered. "There's always plenty to read in the waiting room." But not murder. I was being tested for a driving license for the 3rd time. I had been asked to drive in heavy traffic and had done so successfully. After having been instructed to drive out of town, I began to acquire confidence. Sure that I had passed, I was almost beginning to enjoy my test. The examiner must have been pleased with my performance, for he smiled and said, "Just one more thing, Mr. Ames. Let us suppose that a child suddenly crosses the road in front of you. As soon as I tap on the window, you must stop within 5 feet." I continued driving, and after some time the examiner tapped loudly. Though the sound could be heard clearly, it took me a long time to react. I suddenly pressed the brake pedal hard and we were both thrown forward. The examiner looked at me sadly. "Mr. Ames," he said, in a mournful voice, "you have just killed that child." Red for danger. During a bullfight, a drunk suddenly wandered into the middle of the ring. The crowd began to shout, but the drunk was unaware of the danger. The bull was busy with the matador at the time, but it suddenly caught sight of the drunk who was shouting rude remarks and waving a red cap. Apparently sensitive to criticism, the bull forgot all about the matador and charged at the drunk. The crowd suddenly grew quiet. The drunk, however, seemed quite sure of himself. When the bull got close to him, he clumsily stepped aside to let it pass. The crowd broke into cheers and the drunk bowed. By this time, however, 3 men had come into the ring and they quickly dragged the drunk to safety. Even the bull seemed to feel sorry for him, for it looked on sympathetically until the drunk was out of the way, before once more turning its attention to the matador. A famous clock. When you visit London, one of the first things you will see is Big Ben, the famous clock which can be heard all over the world on the BBC. If the Houses of Parliament had not been burned down in 1834, the great clock would never have been erected. Big Ben takes its name from Sir Benjamin Hall, who was responsible for the making of the clock when the new Houses of Parliament were being built. It is not only of immense size, but is extremely accurate as well. Officials from Greenwich Observatory have the clock checked twice a day. On the BBC, you can hear the clock when it is actually striking because microphones are connected to the clock tower. Big Ben has rarely gone wrong. Once, however, it failed to give the correct time. A painter who had been working on the tower hung a pot of paint on one of the hands and slowed it down. A car called Bluebird. The great racing driver, Sir Malcolm Campbell, was the first man to drive at over 300 miles per hour. He set up a new world record in September 1935 at Bonneville Salt Flats, Utah. Bluebird, the car he was driving, had been specially built for him. It was over 30 feet in length and had a 2,500 horsepower engine. Although Campbell reached a speed of over 304 miles per hour, he had great difficulty in controlling the car because a tire burst during the first run. After his attempt, Campbell was disappointed to learn that his average speed had been 299 miles per hour. However, a few days later, he was told that a mistake had been made. His average speed had been 301 miles per hour. Since that time, racing drivers have reached speeds over 600 miles an hour. Following in his father's footsteps many years later, Sir Malcolm's son, Donald, also set up a world record. Like his father, he was driving a car called Bluebird. The record holder. Children who play truant from school are unimaginative. A quiet day's fishing or 8 hours in a cinema seeing the same film over and over again is usually as far as they get. They have all been put to shame by a boy who, while playing truant, traveled 1,600 miles. He hitchhiked to Dover and, towards evening, went into a boat to find somewhere to sleep. When he woke up next morning, he discovered that the boat had, in the meantime, traveled to Calais. No one noticed the boy as he crept off. From there, he hitchhiked to Paris in a lorry. The driver gave him a few biscuits and a cup of coffee and left him just outside the city. The next car the boy stopped did not take him into the center of Paris, as he hoped it would, but to Perpignan, on the French-Spanish border. There he was picked up by a policeman and sent back to England by the local authorities. He has surely set up a record for the thousands of children who dream of evading school. Out of the limelight. An ancient bus stopped by a dry riverbed and a party of famous actors and actresses got off. Dressed in dark glasses and old clothes, they had taken special precautions so that no one should recognize them. But as they soon discovered, disguises can sometimes be too perfect. "This is a wonderful place for a picnic," said Gloria Gleam. "It couldn't be better, Gloria," Brinkley Mears agreed. "No newspapermen, no film fans. Why don't we come more often?" Meanwhile, two other actors, Rockwall Slinger and Merlin Greaves, had carried two large food baskets to a shady spot under some trees. When they had all made themselves comfortable, a stranger appeared. He looked very angry. "Now you get out of here, all of you," he shouted. "I'm sheriff here. Do you see that notice? It says no camping, in case you can't read." "Look, Sheriff," said Rockwall, "don't be too hard on us. I'm Rockwall Slinger, and this is Merlin Greaves." "Oh, is it?" said the sheriff with a sneer. "Well, I'm Brinkley Mears, and my other name is Gloria Gleam. Now you get out of here fast." SOS. When a light passenger plane flew off course some time ago, it crashed in the mountains and its pilot was killed. The only passengers, a young woman and her two baby daughters, were unhurt. It was the middle of winter. Snow lay thick on the ground. The woman knew that the nearest village was miles away. When it grew dark, she turned a suitcase into a bed and put the children inside it, covering them with all the clothes she could find. During the night, it got terribly cold. The woman kept as near as she could to the children and even tried to get into the case herself, but it was too small. Early next morning, she heard planes passing overhead and wondered how she could send a signal. Then she had an idea. She stamped out the letters SOS in the snow. Fortunately, a pilot saw the signal and sent a message by radio to the nearest town. It was not long before a helicopter arrived on the scene to rescue the survivors of the plane crash. April Fool's Day. "To end our special news bulletin," said the voice of the television announcer, "we're going over to the macaroni fields of Calabria. Macaroni has been grown in this area for over 600 years. Two of the leading growers, Giuseppe Moldova and Riccardo Brabante, tell me that they have been expecting a splendid crop this year, and harvesting has begun earlier than usual. Here you can see two workers who, between them, have just finished cutting 3 cartloads of golden brown macaroni stalks. The whole village has been working day and night, gathering and threshing this year's crop before the September rains. On the right, you can see Mrs. Brabante herself. She has been helping her husband for 30 years now. Mrs. Brabante is talking to the manager of the local factory where the crop is processed. This last scene shows you what will happen at the end of the harvest, the famous Calabrian macaroni eating competition. Signor Fratelli, the present champion, has won it every year since 1991. And that ends our special bulletin for today, Thursday, April 1st. We are now going back to the studio. A successful operation. The mummy of an Egyptian woman who died in 800 BC has just had an operation. The mummy is that of Shephenmut, who was once a singer in the Temple of Thebes. As there were strange marks on the X-ray plates taken of the mummy, doctors have been trying to find out whether the woman died of a rare disease. The only way to do this was to operate. The operation, which lasted for over 4 hours, proved to be very difficult because of the hard resin which covered the skin. The doctors removed a section of the mummy and sent it to a laboratory. They also found something which the X-ray plates did not show: a small wax figure of the god Dumatef. This god, which has the head of a cow, was normally placed inside a mummy. The doctors have not yet decided how the woman died. They feared that the mummy would fall to pieces when they cut it open, but fortunately, this has not happened. The mummy successfully survived the operation. The last one. After reading an article entitled "Cigarette Smoking and Your Health," I lit a cigarette to calm my nerves. I smoked with concentration and pleasure, as I was sure that this would be my last cigarette. For a whole week I did not smoke at all, and during this time, my wife suffered terribly. I had all the usual symptoms of someone giving up smoking: a bad temper and an enormous appetite. My friends kept on offering me cigarettes and cigars. They made no effort to hide their amusement whenever I produced a packet of sweets from my pocket. After 7 days of this, I went to a party. Everybody around me was smoking, and I felt extremely uncomfortable. When my old friend Brian urged me to accept a cigarette, it was more than I could bear. I took one guiltily, lit it, and smoked with satisfaction. My wife was delighted that things had returned to normal once more. Anyway, as Brian pointed out, it is the easiest thing in the world to give up smoking. He himself has done it lots of times. By air. I used to travel by air a great deal when I was a boy. My parents used to live in South America, and I used to fly there from Europe in the holidays. A flight attendant would take charge of me, and I never had an unpleasant experience. I am used to traveling by air, and only on one occasion have I ever felt frightened. After taking off, we were flying low over the city and slowly gaining height, when the plane suddenly turned round and flew back to the airport. While we were waiting to land, a flight attendant told us to keep calm and to get off the plane quietly as soon as it had touched down. Everybody on board was worried, and we were curious to find out what had happened. Later, we learnt that there was a very important person on board. The police had been told that a bomb had been planted on the plane. After we had landed, the plane was searched thoroughly. Fortunately, nothing was found, and 5 hours later we were able to take off again. The Crystal Palace. Perhaps the most extraordinary building of the 19th century was the Crystal Palace, which was built in Hyde Park for the Great Exhibition of 1851. The Crystal Palace was different from all other buildings in the world, for it was made of iron and glass. It was one of the biggest buildings of all time, and a lot of people from many countries came to see it. A great many goods were sent to the exhibition from various parts of the world. There was also a great deal of machinery on display. The most wonderful piece of machinery on show was Nasmyth's steam hammer. Though in those days, traveling was not as easy as it is today. Steamboats carried thousands of visitors across the Channel from Europe. On arriving in England, they were taken to the Crystal Palace by train. There were 6 million visitors in all, and the profits from the exhibition were used to build museums and colleges. Later, the Crystal Palace was moved to South London. It remained one of the most famous buildings in the world until it was burnt down in 1936. Escape. When he had killed the guard, the prisoner of war quickly dragged him into the bushes. Working rapidly in the darkness, he soon changed into the dead man's clothes. Now, dressed in a blue uniform and with a rifle over his shoulder, the prisoner marched boldly up and down in front of the camp. He could hear shouting in the camp itself. Lights were blazing and men were running here and there. They had just discovered that a prisoner had escaped. At that moment, a large black car with 4 officers inside it stopped at the camp gates. The officers got out and the prisoner stood to attention and saluted as they passed. When they had gone, the driver of the car came towards him. The man obviously wanted to talk. He was rather elderly with gray hair and clear blue eyes. The prisoner felt sorry for him, but there was nothing else he could do. As the man came near, the prisoner knocked him to the ground with a sharp blow. Then, jumping into the car, he drove off as quickly as he could.